Hey everybody, Pastor Chris here, and I'm trying something a little different here now with all the things with COVID-19, and we can't really be gathering so much in large groups, though we are having our Sunday services with about 30 people there. Still, most of you, your comfort level is doing things online, and that's perfectly acceptable. And so what I want to do, though, is each week I'm going to try and post a short video about the upcoming sermon, sort of a promotional video. But a big part of what I want to do is it will be sort of opening the door to how I prepare, because I have a very specific way I prepare for a sermon. And you may have noticed, you may not have noticed, but over the years, I tend to preach on things that happen, on events from the Bible, rather than the letters of the Bible, say. I have preached on from the letters of Paul, the letters of Peter, James, the letters 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. I have preached on those, and I love those books, but they are really, they're reflections on things that have happened. And so I tend to preach on the things that happened, on the events themselves, because I want to, for me personally, I want to be able to get as close as I can to experiencing it the way, or at least get a feel for experiencing it the way the people at those events experienced it. I remember reading a book once where the author talked about we tend to analyze the past, but we experience the present. And their whole point was maybe we need to switch that around some and be more analyzing of the present and experiencing the past when possible. So that's my goal, is to bring these stories, these events to life so that I, and in my sermons, you can experiencing them, or at least get a feel for the experience of what it was like for those people who were there. So I ask you to be patient, because I'm really just learning how to use a lot of this technology. So what I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to put up and share on the screen here the Bible program I use. It's called Logos Bible Software. And you can see how I have it laid out here. You can see I have the New Revised Standard Version open, and all that stuff you see below it, that's the Greek that's below it. I also use the New Living Translation. These are the two I've chosen to use mostly. I do use others, but those are the ones I mostly use. And I'll tell you why. The New Living Translation it was created to be listened to. The people who translated it, their goal was the first people who heard the gospel message, that's what they did. They heard it. They didn't read it. It was only written later. So their goal was to write a translation that would be beneficial to just listen to it. It's not what you would call necessarily a study Bible. It uses the technical term for the translation they did. It's called dynamic equivalency, or thought for thought, or idea for idea translation, which is, there are some risks there that they'll have the wrong idea of what's being said. That's why you want to make sure you're using translation done by people who are really qualified to do it. In this case, I think they do a really good job. The translators of the NLT, like all translators and like all people, have their own bias, and they come from their own position. But I think I really like it overall because it flows so nicely. The New Revised Standard Version tends to be, it's written at a higher grammatical level. The sentence structure is more complex. It really is a good Bible for using to study. There are other good ones. These are just the two I happen to use. And I also use then, this is a series called The Bible for Everyone, written by N.T. Wright, who is a scholar and actually was a priest in the Anglican Church in England. And he just does a great job at distilling things down to really easy to understand ideas. Not simple ideas, but easier to understand. So I always like to read his translation, and then he always writes a little bit about each passage. And sometimes I find what he writes useful for my sermons, and sometimes it's not, but I always find he has good insights. And then I have over on the other side here, I have the Greek. It is the Nestle Aland Greek New Testament. And I am not a Greek scholar, but I spend a lot of time with the Greek and researching the words are used, how it's used. Because the reality is the language we speak shapes how we think about things. And there's a reason that Greek was the language of the philosophers, that Greek was the language spoken where philosophy even rose to be a thing, because it is a language that lends itself to that. It's a language that thinks that way. It's very interested, it's very strong in Greek. You come across what they call these be verbs, the idea of existence. What am I? That permeates the Greek language. And that was the language that the New Testament was written in. So I do that. And so the text for this Sunday is the feeding of the 5,000. And I just want to pull up, first thing I do, I read it in several different translations. And then I start highlighting things that pop out at me and looking at things. And you see here, you notice it says, he left in a boat, talking about Jesus. Well, then the next line, it says, the crowds followed on foot. That just helps paint a visual picture of what's going on, that Jesus is in this boat and the people running along the shore watching where he goes. Other things that jumped out at me, it says he went to a remote place. I want to know, what does that mean by remote? Because there's a difference between some place that is true wilderness, which plays a very important role in the Bible, in the events in the Bible, as opposed to the countryside. They're different kinds of places, and they mean different things in a story. When it says that Jesus goes to the wilderness in Matthew chapter 4 to be tempted by the devil, that means something very specific. The wilderness, there's no help, there's nothing there, it is desolate. But I did a little research here where it says it went to a remote place. And I saw the word, if I highlight, this is the nice thing about my program, all the things come up about what it means. And I find out that this word, when I did a little more research, really just means a place in the countryside away from the people. He's not in the wilderness, he's not in the desert, he's just out in the country by himself. And then realize what comes right before this. What comes right before this, if I scroll up in my Bible, I see, well, John the Baptist is dead. And right before that is where I preached on a couple of weeks ago, Jesus is rejected by his hometown and his family. They were offended by who he was and what he was doing, who he claimed to be. So I see that he's been rejected by his family, he's been rejected by his hometown, and now his partner, really, John the Baptist, his cousin, his friend, the person who introduced him to the crowds. This is a flashback, but we see now he's dead. Matthew is setting us up here for why Jesus wants to be alone, why he wants to get away from the crowds. Because, we say he is fully human. He's fully God, fully human. His fully human part here is dealing with the pain, the sorrow, the loss of both the rejection by people closest to him and the death of the one person who really got who he was. And that sets the scene then for what we have coming with the feeding of the 5,000. Other things that caught my attention about this, again, it's a remote place. The disciples say, send the crowds away. Found out some interesting stuff on that phrase I'll talk about Sunday. And then he blessed the fish and the bread they have and gave them to the people. Reminiscent of, not reminiscent because it happens before, possibly maybe foreshadowing the Last Supper. And it says everybody ate as much as they wanted. And 12 baskets left over, 12 disciples picking it up. But there's some interesting stuff about the baskets and about how the pieces are described as being left over. I'll talk about those things on Sunday. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of of a background and what's coming up on Sunday. And let me just figure out, there we go, stop sharing screen. And so that will be on Sunday, the feeding of the 5,000. It comes from Matthew chapter 14, beginning at verse 21. So if I don't see you Sunday, I hope that you will see me online as we post the sermons. It'll be this Sunday, both the sermon and the service, 2 separate videos. You have one, the service with the sermon, or just the sermon by itself to watch. They'll be on our website, on our YouTube channel, and on our Facebook page. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you Sunday.